Hey guys, this is Andrew. Today I'm going to do a demo on using React.js in conjunction with a state management library called Redux. I will also be doing some asynchronous stuff within there using another library called Redux-Observable. So that's the topic for today, React with Redux with Redux-Observable. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so to begin with, how did I get started using React? Well, I went through the demonstration or the tutorial on their website. So that's how I recommend you start as well. So within there's the command to install the core library or to create an application in React using the core library that it will conditionally install as well, which is called create React app. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal and run that command. So npx will install the library if it doesn't exist, and then it will also run it. So it's called create React app, and then the name of the application we're going to be making. You can call it whatever. Let's call it, I don't know, Redux Observable with React. And then that'll take a minute, so I'm just going to pause the video and get back to you once that's finished installing. All right, so when I was trying to decide how to record this video, there was a couple paths I could have taken. One of them would have been to take you like literally step by step through how I found the things in that documentation and how I tried them out and how they worked, how they didn't work. That would have taken forever for me to walk you through all that, and it would inevitably lead to tons of errors as I was kind of making such a video. So like I didn't want to make a 6-hour video. Try to it's going to be a long video nonetheless, but so the other option would have been to just kind of have some code pre-prepared and kind of like walk you through the general creation process of it. But then if I did it purely like that, then you guys would be like, how did he come up with that? Like it would show like no way for you guys to start from scratch other than through just straight up watching this video. So I kind of wanted to try to balance those two options so that you can kind of see how I generally went from the documentation and the tutorials over to creating this demo application, combining all the different concepts. So keep that in mind. So for example, like when I'm installing these libraries, I also wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to just install them all right at the very beginning or kind of piece my way through as figuring out what I need, what I don't need. So anyways, let's go over to the library that we're going to be using for state management called Redux. And let's go ahead and run that install command for that. And it doesn't tell you on this page, but you'll also need the regular Redux library as well. So let's go ahead and first off, we're going to need to cd into the folder, or I can just open up the project in my editor of choice, which is WebStorm, and then I can just use the terminal from within there, so that way I don't have to worry about what directory I'm in. So I'm just going to open up WebStorm. That seems the easier route. Okay. So now that WebStorm is open, I'm going to go ahead and just open up that project that we created. My React. And Redux-Observable with React. Okay. So that'll take a second to index. And while it finishes doing that, that's the build configuration for it. I click on Add Configuration. If you're not using WebStorm, you don't need to do this. You can just start your application up using npm start. However, since I have the tool, I might as well use it, so I'm just going to go ahead and add in the configuration here. Okay, so I click on add configuration, go to templates, actually hit the plus button, and then choose npm. It's going to be npm start. And then we're going to go ahead and just run the basic React sample app by pressing the play button, or if you're just running in the command line, you can just say npm start, and that'll build your app and launch it in the browser. You may need to manually open up the browser to port 3000 if you're using a different editor. All right, so our React app started up nicely. So if this is your first time using React, I encourage you to just explore the project structure. Take a look at the different files, how they work, how things are set up and registered. One thing part of the reason why I'm kind of going so basic in this video, even though I'm going to be getting to some complex stuff, is because I'm coming from an Angular background, so this video is going to have a particular appeal to people who have like limited or almost no knowledge of React. At least that's partially due to my YouTube audience is coming from an Angular background. So this video is kind of partially catered to helping people get started even from some of the raw concepts. So we're going to work quickly and accelerate quickly, but that's just explaining why I'm covering some of these completely elementary things. So someone just watching this casually has an idea of what's going on and isn't completely like lost. So anyways, in this index file, you can see some kind of irregular notation here. Instead of having an HTML element in like quotes or something, it's just kind of thrown directly into a JavaScript function. So this notation is called JSX. It's kind of React specific type of markup language. So you may need to set a specific language settings in your editor so that it doesn't throw errors when it shows you this kind of syntax. So so this is our main application component rendered here, and the component files are up here. So it's very similar to Angular in that it's component based, as is pretty much every popular front-end framework today, including Vue.js. So anyways, yeah, that's our React application running. So going back to our web browser, I forget if we installed the Redux library yet. So the Redux library, as I might have mentioned, I'm not sure yet. Anyways, it's our state management library. So let's go ahead and check out our package JSON file. Oops. Where is it? There we go. So I did not install that yet. So let's go ahead. Let's close this terminal so I don't keep opening it by mistake. And let's just go to the terminal down here and install that. And it should only take a second. Okay, so that went ahead and got installed. So I forgot we actually want another library, so we're gonna actually use a save flag, so that way it gets written into our package JSON file as well. So let's just redo that one library, and also we're gonna install the core Redux library as well. You'll get an error later on if you forget the second library. So I didn't see it in the documentation, but the errors will be pretty specific. So that's just how I ended up figuring that one out. All right. So one other thing we want to install is the ReduxDev Tools, which are going to be used so that we can display our application state within the within the browser. So go ahead and install that as well. All right, so a lot of the setup's already taken care of. So now let's go back to the documentation and go to the basic tutorial. So basically they start you off with some starter code in the code sandbox. I have that open up over here already. So that basically just shows you a bunch of the application structure that they recommend. So they recommend having a Redux folder with kind of the core connections. There's also a store file, which creates the store. So the store is where we're going to store our data. Redux is a singular JSON object that represents your entire application state. So we need to register something called a root reducer. So what is a root reducer, or what's a reducer in general? Well, as you can imagine, the root reducer combines all the other reducers. And what are reducers, you might ask? Well, reducers are just functions that you create, which these functions, all they do is they decide what parts of the data you want your application to remember as various events or actions occur throughout your application. So these functions decide what your application remembers. That's as simple as it gets. And then this root reducer just combines all those functions into one and registers it in the store, or down here. So we need this kind of setup in our application as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Redux folder, and I'm going to put all the centralized registration stuff within that folder. I'm not going to follow this architecture 100%, but I'm going to keep it fairly close. So let's go over to our folder, create a new directory. Let's call it Redux. Okay. And within there, I'm going to create a store.js file. One thing I forgot to mention is when you're creating the React app using the npx create React app command, you can specify a -- TypeScript flag if you're interested in using TypeScript in your app. I'm trying to keep it a little bit simpler by not using TypeScript today. However, it's encouraged for larger projects, so it's something you should play around with. All right, so we have a store. Let's create a root reducer. And let's do stuff with them. So going back to the documentation for a second. The first thing it says to do is to make the store available to the app. And to do this, we wrap the app in a provider tag. So down in our index file, they put a provider tag around the main component. So let's do that. All right. So provider. And you'll need to import this tag as well from React-Redux. All right. And then within there, oh, it auto-completes. That's nice. So store equals store. So we don't have this inner store variable defined yet. However, we will soon enough. So if we just take a look at the sample code, it shows us, we're basically just copying some of the basic setup from the sample code right now. So we're going to be importing the store, which is a default export from this store file. So import store from, what did we call it in our application? I think we just put it in the Redux folder. So. Okay. So now we got to define it in there. So in the store, let's go back to the dummy code and look at their store file. Okay, so we just export create store. You can just copy this. It doesn't get much simpler than that. There's nothing unique about it. It's just basic setup. One thing a little bit different though is in our case, calling the root reducer a different file name. Okay, cool. So we have our store set up. However, we don't really define the root reducer yet. So let's do that. Look at theirs. Don't need to copy this whole file, but I'm going to. And we'll just delete what we don't need. So some of this stuff is specific to their application. So let's just take the stuff we want and leave the rest. All right, cool. So we have a root reducer, but we don't have any reducers within there. So it's kind of useless right now, but it's a good start. So, so what's next? So is everything working? We have a store being registered from here, which imports the root reducer from here. So yeah, I think everything's still working. If we go to our browser, we should, yeah, our app's still working. Okay, so what's next, you might ask? So for our application, I'm going to do the same thing that I did in one of my Angular videos, is create a simple like login and logout functionality, render some data onto a dashboard, and then yeah, call it a day. So let's create a directory for auth. So I like to group things by module or functionality or feature. In the Angular version of the Redux library, they call them features. So a feature is a grouping of functionality, and within each feature, there are three main components within the Redux ideology. There's a reducer, there is a there's the reducer, there's also something called a side effect file, which in the terms of the library that we're going to be using today, that is going to be called an epic. So yeah. And I had drawn a memory blank for some reason. The third thing is called an action. Actions are things, just a list of events that happen within your application. So actions can be anything from a user clicking on a button. So a user tries to log in, that's an action. User tries to log out, that's an action. The application starts to load data, that's another action. Something that's happening. They can be as descriptive as you want. The more descriptive, the easier it is to kind of trace the history of your application state. So we have an auth file folder now, so let's go ahead and create a file within there. We're going to call them auth.actions.js. So as I mentioned a second ago, we have three main parts. We have actions, we have reducers, so auth reducer, and then we have a side effects file as well. In the terminology of this library, they call them epics. So let's go like that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and continue with registering these into the main part of the Redux library. All right, so usually when I start a new feature, I start with the actions. This is just a list of events that can happen. So for example, login. Um, login attempted equals login attempted. In the Angular world, they typically like to put where the action is coming from using square brackets at the start of your action. So for example, the login attempted would be coming from when the user presses the login button on the login page. So I didn't see any of this style guide within React, so I'm just trying to give you some exposure to it. So we're going to just do this for the various things that could be happening in our app. Oops, wrong button. Wrong button again. I'm just going to keep it short by not typing all that stuff out. So you get the idea though. All right. So we have a good set of things that are happening in our app. So that's a good start. Now in React, there's something called an action creator, or an action creator, which is just a function that returns an action of this specific type. So sorry, these here up here, these aren't actual actions. These are just the action types. So let's go ahead and create some of these action creators. So an action is just a JSON object with a type and optionally a payload. So for example, for when we attempt to log in, the type is login attempted, and payload is just payload. So we can use the enhanced JSON object literal notation. Okay, so we can do the same for the other ones. It's kind of repetitive, I guess, but yeah, whatever. So one nice thing about the Angular version is that they have some very good command line tooling built in nowadays called NGRX schematics. It leverages the Angular schematics tools for kind of building some templates for auto-generating code. So what's nice in Angular is you can auto-generate an entire feature at a time. So a lot of the repetitiveness gets eliminated through that system, which is very nice. So anyways, let's go ahead and just knock these out real quick. Sorry. Okay. Now that we've gotten our actions file taken care of, let's go ahead and set up the reducer. So we typically do the side effects, the asynchronous stuff later in the fx file. So that comes last usually, at least the order I do it in. So now to set up our reducer, and remember the reducer tells our application what we want it to remember. Well, in order for something to be remembered, we need application state. So let's set up some initial state. We're going to have username is logged in and token. All right, and we're going to export. State with an initial parameter option and the action. All right. All right, so as I was saying, this reducers determine what you want your application to remember as each of the actions happen. So when the login successful action happens, what do we want to remember? Well, we want to maintain the previous state, so we're going to spread out the previous state like that into the new state. And then we're going to say is logged in. It's going to be true. And token we're going to get from the payload. We're going to pass it back to this reducer when we dispatch the action. So you'll see that in a little bit. Let's handle the other cases real quick. Okay. So when we attempt to log in, I'm just going to set the username. From the payload. And we can keep the previous state as well. However, when they're not logged in, they probably don't have any state anyway, so it doesn't really matter in this case, but for consistency, let's keep it. And lastly, login failed. There it is. We're just going to return the initial state. Notice that we're using the spread operator because we don't want to modify the previous state. We want to just kind of take the data from within it and plop it down into this new state. Some people use immutability libraries, such as immutability.js, to really enforce that they don't accidentally modify the previous state. Okay. And we really don't need a default case, but I'll just put it there just because people like it, like default states or default cases in switch statements. So anyways, there's a reducer. All right, so now let's register that reducer in the root reducer. All right, here we go. Unused property. That's interesting. Okay. Well, anyways, let's ignore that for now. So, trying to think where to do next. All right, so let's set up the dev tools for Redux. So let's go to the browser, and if you haven't already installed it, you want to install the ReduxDev Tools extension for the browser that you're using, either Chrome or Firefox or Safari. I have it already installed here. However, it says that there's no data store found, so you have to follow these instructions. So once it loads, it'll tell you that you need to add this. As the second argument to the create store function. Okay, and save that. I'm gonna put this on a second line actually. All right. So now that that's taken care of, let's go back to the browser. And now you can see that it's recognizing our application is using Redux. So cool. Let's continue. I just want to make a quick note about the thing I called features. Just copying a link that I have on my other screen. So in some of the documentation I saw, I just wanted to show you guys this other pattern. They call them like duck modules, and this is just kind of like the recommended pattern when working with the React-Redux library. So they have action types separately from the actions. I kind of grouped these two into one file, the action types, and then the actions were both in the same file for me. However, this is a popular, as you can see by the number of stars in it, this is also a popular pattern. So if you see like separate action type files, you know where they came from. So yeah. All right, let's continue. Okay, so let's continue by connecting one of our components to the Redux data store. So to do that, we need two functions. Okay, so in map state to props, we are going to just, sorry, I forgot the parameters. So in here, we're just gonna return the state for now. And I need parentheses around here. Okay. Wrong button. Okay. And in here, we're gonna define our action dispatchers. So basically, a function that we'll call in order to dispatch the action that is happening in our application. So it's kind of like we're throwing up a flag saying, "Hey, this is happening." That's the concept behind a dispatcher. It's just a function that we can call when in response to a certain event, so that the Redux data store knows that a certain event has happened. That's our way of communicating the occurrence of events or actions. Okay, so to do that, the user is going to try to log in, so we're going to just have an attempt login function, and it's going to take a parameter called the payload, and we're going to call the action creator, call the attempt login, and we're going to give it the payload. So this attempt login on the right here, this is being imported. This is connected to this one right here, and this one we're just defining right here. But this one right here is connected to the import. So when we dispatch this action right here, it's going to call the action creator through this function. So we're going to end up dispatching this function, this action through our component in a minute. So anyways, we're just getting through the setup though first. So anyways, once you do that, there's just some basic setup we're doing still. Import connect and pass it these two things we just created. Okay. And then we define the component, and then we connect. We apply that middleware to the component. Where did my mouse go? So this is what's known as a higher order component, because we're wrapping our app component and we're just essentially adding more functionality to it. So higher order components are used throughout React.js. It's like a design pattern they use. And we're going to use that connected component instead of the regular one. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and set up our form, our login form. So in a React component, there's a render function which returns the JSX syntax, which is kind of like the HTML. So let's delete what they had and make our own. So we're going to have a div with a class name. So notice some of the notation in JSX is slightly different than regular HTML. So in HTML it'll be class, and here it's class name for JSX. So something to keep in mind. So the class name is just going to be app. We're going to have a form. And on submit, we're going to call this dot attempt login. Now notice in React how in the on the event listeners we're passing in a function reference. So this causes some kinds of complications with the context of this keyword. Some of the binding for that gets lost when you pass these functions through here like that. So there's a couple ways to fix that. So we need the attempt login function here. So one way would be to, instead of writing it like this, we could say it just equals a function like that, and that way we don't have to worry about the context of this. I'll show you the other way in another example. But essentially, the other way to do it would be to, in the constructor, we could use the bind function to bind this context. So anyways, let's continue with creating our form. So we're going to have input fields. Yeah, let's just create them for now. This is going to be password. Go ahead and save that. Make sure your app is running. Logo is defined but never used. Okay, let's get rid of logo then. How do I optimize my imports? Forget the shortcut. Whatever. Just delete it. Okay. So here's our app. I'm just going to put these on separate lines real quick in the CSS. No big deal. I'm not even going to bother with encapsulation because we're not really having that many things in our app anyways. Yeah. I mean, I could. So typically, part of the encapsulation principle is put a class on your outermost, on the component in its entirety, and then you put everything, you style everything that you want in that component accordingly. So let's say that everything within our app component, we want it to be block level, so that it goes on a new line for each element. Okay, and now that we have that taken care of, let's continue by setting up our form. All right. So in React, there are libraries you can use to do complex form management, such as validation and stuff. If you want something simpler, you can do something like this and just store the form data within your component state. So state is a special variable in React. It's kind of like a reserved type thing, because you can set your state using a React function, a React defined function, and then your component will kind of re-render itself when the references change within there. So we're going to have this kind of data. Okay. And in the actual form, see, this is kind of why I like having my text small, so I don't have to keep scrolling around all the time. I can have everything all on screen. But people have been complaining that my text was too small, so I guess now they're going to complain that I'm scrolling too much. But anyways, I'm giving it a try. So let's give this input a name. And the value is going to be tied to the state of this component. And if that's undefined, I forget where I put that symbol on my keyboard. Okay, there it is. Let's not do that one yet. Okay. And okay, so oops. Let me undo that. 1 second. Press the wrong button. Okay, so when the data in each field changes, we're going to call a function. And we got to define that function. Okay, so I'm going to show you the second way for dealing with this context. We say this function name equals this the function name dot bind, and then we pass in the context to bind it to. Oops. And since we're, let me scroll up just a little bit. Since we're extending a component, we gotta call the super function. Okay, cool. So when we handle that input change, we're calling the same function for both of these. So we need to kind of use a switch statement to determine which one we're getting and act accordingly. So within there, we can say this .set state, which is a React defined function. And within there, we're going to pass the state or the portion of the state that we want to set. Sorry. So within our state object, we have a form object. And within there, we want to spread out a previous form data. And after that, we just want to change the value of this one field that's changing. So this function is going to receive an event, and we can use the object destructuring in JavaScript to pull the target out of that event. And from within the target, we can pull out both the name and the value of the HTML element. So in our case, username and password are the names of the input fields, and they're also the attributes in our form state that we want to define. So I can specify just using that name, and I'm going to specify the value. Okay, so I think that should work now. Our form state, let's take a look in the browser using the React tools. Let's find our component in there. So as I delete stuff, you can see in the bottom right corner here, the state updates correctly. Cool. All right, so that's working. Okay, so now let's dispatch the login action when they click on the button. So currently, if I click on the submit button, it would actually submit the form, but we don't want that to happen. So we're going to call it e.preventDefault. And also we're going to use our action dispatcher I'm going to show you it up here. Here's our action dispatcher temp login, and it's accessible through the props. And we're going to pass it a payload with the username and password from our state. Okay. So now let's just take a look at our stuff in the browser and look at the ReduxDev Tools. So I click login, and we dispatch a login attempted action. So cool. We're making good progress. We just dispatched our first action successfully. And not only that, but we are reducing that action and determining what we want to remember, which in this case is just the username. Okay, so let's continue. So when they click that, we want to do some asynchronous actions or some asynchronous stuff. So that's going to use an asynchronous library. So there's three main options for this. One is Redux Saga, one is Redux-Observable, another one's called Thunk. I'm using this one because I'm very familiar with RxJs already. So yeah. So this page has some introduction on it. It shows you the basics of what an epic is, which is the same thing as in the Angular terms, it's the same thing as an effect. So yeah. Okay, so let's install this library and get going with it. And here is the documentation comparing the options for thunks, sagas, and observables. Okay. So anyways, let's install those libraries as I said a minute ago. So let's go to the terminal. And this will take a minute as well. All right, so when I showed you that duck pattern, I was a little mixed up. That duck pattern applies here to how they're going to be putting all things into one file, such as putting the root reducer in the same file as the root epic, and then they call the file the root module. I'm going to keep my root epic separate from my root reducer. So yeah. Okay. So in our root epic, before we continue any further, I'm just gonna save my code. Okay. I like to save my code from time to time. Okay. So anyways, And just like with our reducer, we need a centralized epic which handles all of our asynchronous code. So let's go ahead and, well, we're going to need to register this in the store soon enough. So I guess we can take care of that as well. So let's go to our store file. And in here, this gets a little bit tricky. So just bear with me for this setup of the epics. So it's all documented in the Redux-Observable page. But yeah, like down here, and configuring the store, which is what we're about to do right now. So it's just a bunch of like arbitrary seeming commands. So just bear with me while I get this entered into our application. Okay. So we're going to need another module here. I believe it's called history. This is just, the purpose of this is just so that we can work correctly when navigating to different paths. Yeah, it's called history. All right, so we didn't really need history just quite yet, but we're going to need it soon enough, so might as well get it done. Okay. So anyways, let's go ahead and create that browser history. So I'm going to change the structure of this export default a little bit. We're going to create the store within this function. And sorry, got distracted there for a second. So we're gonna here's our root reducer. So in order to work with the history later on when we are using different URLs. We're going to need to link the root reducer to the history as well. So we're going to change this to a function as well. And pass it a reference to the history object. So up here, the default export is going to be a function. We'll fix that in a second also. So as you can see, the setup here is a lot more cumbersome than it is using the Angular setup, just because of the command line schematics tools in Angular that you have, but it's doable either way. And I've worked in Angular with Redux before they had those nice dev tools. So yeah, it's doable no matter what. And I believe we need another plugin. I thought I already installed this one, but I guess not. Okay, so hit Alt Enter, and it's not recognizing it, so we got to do it manually. There we go. You know what? We haven't really set up the router 100% yet. But we're in this file already. I'm just going to show you that one more thing we need to install instead of constantly coming back to this file to install more stuff. Okay. We need to import this and then return the store. I'm missing a parenthesis somewhere. Alright, sorry. So I accidentally paused the video for a second. I'm not sure if I recorded this or not yet. So essentially we were in the process of just setting up the store. So we had just finished setting up this one file right here. And so yeah, I'm just showing you this code here because we had set up the store, installed some of the libraries for routing and for the router middleware, and set up the Epic middleware for handling the async code. And then I had switched over to just mention that we were starting to expect that this default export from the root reducer is a function now, because we're going to be passing it the history. So what I did next is I went into the root reducer file, and I changed this into a function. So I said that we're expecting a history object that returns combined reducers. And it's going to also get a router object with the history. Okay, so that should cover any gap I might have had in my recording. I think I just accidentally hit the pause button for a second, so hopefully there's nothing missing. So we are connecting the router there, and let me actually change the shortcut on my recording software so I don't accidentally hit the button again. All right, I'm back. So I changed the hotkey for my pause button. One thing you'll notice, I'll accidentally type a right parentheses when I pause the video though, so just kind of be aware of that. I'm not typing that randomly. It's just a temporary thing while I figure out a better hotkey for pausing my recording software. Okay, so anyways, we went ahead and fixed this root reducer. It's now a function that returns the same thing that it used to, except it's function now. That way it has access to the history as a parameter. So we had set up this store, and one thing we had changed when we were in this file is that we're now exporting a function called configure store. We're not exporting the store directly. So it's now a function, so it's a default export also. So where we're importing this default export, the store object right here is a function, so we actually want to be calling that function. So just go ahead and save that. And so part of the reason why I'm going through all this setup for the routing is because when the user tries logging in, we're going to call an API, and when they get a successful response, we're going to go ahead and change the route or application. So let's go ahead and install the React Router DOM package. And go back to our index file where we are already actually. And we're going to replace the component in here with a router. Like that. So yeah, so that's like the main setup we do. We just got to import these. Sorry, we're gonna jump ahead and say use the connected router. With reference to the history object. We're gonna have to import that. So we have to use these like specialized routers because we're working with the Redux library instead of just the regular router library. And in React, if you use like kind of like an empty component tag, they call that a fragment. Because sometimes in the current state of the framework, they have difficulty with like having multiple root level components. So sometimes you just need to wrap them with like the empty tags almost to, in the current version of React at least. I think in the future they'll get that sorted out. All right, so anyways, we need to import route. I thought I just installed it, but maybe it was a different one I installed. It looks the same to me. Maybe it hasn't re-indexed yet or something. Let me just make sure it's the same. Looks the same to me. Oh, it's not complaining. It's just saying that it didn't index yet. Yeah, okay, I was right. All right. And that's the only path we have for now, so let's save that. Let's just see if our app is still running. That's always a good thing to do from time to time. Let's refresh. Cool. Check the console. No errors. Good. So yeah, there's a lot of setup, but once you get it set up, you only have to set it up once. So this is kind of just showing you the hassle I had to go through working through some of the documentation, trying to get things working. But yeah, it is what it is sometimes, I guess. So anyways, okay. We've done that. We've set that up. I think we're pretty much ready to start trying out some of our epics, which are what the Redux-Observable library is all about. I'm just glancing at a couple of my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything important. All right, whatever. Have we registered our epics in our store? Yeah, we did. That's where I accidentally paused the video and such. So we have stuff registered, and we need to put our auth epic in here. Oh, I didn't define it yet. That's why I can't import it yet. But we'll put it there in a second. So let's go to our auth epics folder or file and create our first epic. So I'm going to export const attempt to log in. Where's the $sign? There we go. So we're using RxJs here. So when you see a $sign at the end, that means it's an observable of some sort. And to get the data, to transform the data, we use the pipe operator. This is not a course on RxJS. I have another video on RxJS observables and behavior subjects. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. Also, there's learnrxjs.io. That's a great website for learning RxJS. So I'm kind of assuming you already know RxJS for this video. If not, you can still follow along, but there might be some gaps in what you are internalizing. So we start by filtering down to the action of interest. And so we want to perform an async operation, so we're going to use the higher order observable operator. In this case, I'm just going to use the merge map operator. Switch map is also fine. Yeah, let's use switch map instead. I leave it as an exercise for the reader or the watcher to look up these operators and see what differences they have. So we're going to use the fetch API to do a HTTPS request to a sample or like a dummy API. Okay, so that's the end of the fetch. And then if the response is okay, we're going to get the data from it. And otherwise, we're going to use the ignore elements operator to just stop all data from flowing through these transformers. And since we're using a higher order observable operator, we're gonna pass the data from this inner like asynchronous function over into the main flow of data coming through these set of transformers. That's what these higher order observable operators do, is that they can take data from the returned async stuff and wait for it to come back and then put it into the main flow of these main transformers on the original flow of items. And then if the data comes through that step successfully, we're going to map it to a login success. And we can always add some error handling. Yeah, you might need to fix this error handling. For now, I'm just going to ignore it because we're just going to focus on the successful case right now. I leave that as a challenge for the viewer to get that type stuff sorted out. There. It's not complaining when I do it like that, so maybe that would be sufficient. All right, so anyways, yeah, so that should be making the API call when they try to log in, and then putting that data into the next operator, and then calling the login success. Where is it? Yeah, the login success action creator, and passing it that data from the API response. So that's how we're going to pass data to the login success action creator. And yeah, I think we can try it out now and see how it's. Oh, we got to register that epic. So auth epic. What did I call it? It's not called auth epic. It's called attempt login. Okay, now let's try it out. Okay, cool. So you can see here that due to we had already set up the auth reducer to handle the login successful action, and it's remembering the token from the payload that we're giving it, and it's saying that is logged into true. So just a quick reminder, reducers tell your application what to remember from each of the actions that happen. So here, login successful, so we set logged into true, and the token we take from the payload, which is passed in through the epic, which is happening right. Well, we get the data here. It gets passed along into through the pipe down into here, and it gets passed into this function. Cool. So you pretty much now know how to do everything in React Redux. I'm just going to keep rambling on for a little bit longer for those of you who want to just see it a little bit more in action, and who just want to see a little bit more React as well, because not everybody here is all too familiar with React, considering I have a large Angular fan base. So anyways, let's keep on going. All right, so when the user logs in, we want to navigate to a dashboard. So, well, we're going to need to do a couple things. One of those things is we're going to need a dashboard feature. So, I always start with the actions, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. I'm not covering all the cases here, so I'm not going to create one for failed. There's no room for failure in our application. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to spend the time on it. And the reducer, let's take care of that one as well. Oops. It's the same concept as in the previous one. Depending on which action it is, we can remember different parts of the data. Yeah, I'm not going to do anything special for these, so let's just keep it as the same. When the load is successful, though, we'll remember some of the data that comes back. Cool. I'm not even going to put a default case on the switch statement because I'm going to be a rebel. And we also need a dashboard component, unfortunately. Can't do things without some setup. Again, I'm kind of borrowing some of the Angular notation with the dot component. Oops, I didn't mean to make that a TypeScript file. All right. So just bear with me while I create this component. Hey, sorry. So I noticed that it wasn't recording again. So I'm just going to cover the past couple minutes of what I was doing, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So what I was doing is I was about to create the dashboard stuff. So I had just finished creating the dashboard actions. So I defined the types, and what they return is just here are the actual actions creators, and the JSON objects are the actions themselves. They have the type and the payload. And the reducers, we have an initial state with some dashboard data. And this is the reducer itself, which, depending on the action type, if the dashboard loads successfully, return the state. And we also decide that we're going to remember in the dashboard data attribute, we're going to put in some data that's going to be coming back from the API call. And then we don't do anything really special when they just attempt to load the data. And yeah, so that covers the past like few minutes of what I was doing. before I noticed my recording was paused. And immediately before that, I was we were looking at what happens after the user successfully logs in. We need to be able to go to the dashboard. So that's why I had started to create the dashboard itself. And had created all the different files for the different parts of the feature. And I had done the actions first, then I set up the reducer, and then I had started to create the component when I noticed the video had paused again. So I'm not sure if it had started to, if pausing had occurred while I had already been working on this component file or not, but either way, just bear with me while I get this taken care of. So we're going to create the dashboard component itself. It's going to just be a very simple hello from dashboard in the render function, and then we'll go from there. So once we get this created, we'll be able to navigate to this component. And this involves just a bunch of like redundant stuff from the Redux library in order to connect it to the data store. So just bear with me for a couple minutes while we get it all connected up. So so yeah. Okay. So anyways, where were we? All right. So class dashboard. Well, first let's import React. And that's the basic component, but let's connect it to the data store and set up the dispatcher for loading the data, because we're going to start to load the data when the component loads. So let's do that. And we're going to have a dispatcher for loading the dashboard data. Do it's another library for handling the asynchronous navigation. We might have to import it manually though. Yeah. Hopefully in the future they'll make these imports a little bit easier. Okay, cool. So yeah. All right, let's just run our code, I guess, and hopefully it doesn't freeze. So we click login. Oops, I missed. Click login. Login is successful, but we did not navigate. Let me refresh the page. Maybe sometimes you just gotta refresh things. Click login. You get the login successful action, but the navigation does not occur. So let's debug a little bit. So the reason is because we didn't register this epic. That's something you got to remember to do. I believe in Angular you don't have to register each epic. I think that was one thing that's nice about Angular, because I constantly forget when I'm working in this React framework. So anyways, let's stick it in there and get it working. So login. Success epic. Oh, that's weird. I'm gonna refactor this one to have the word epic at the end, just so it's easier to not get them confused. Okay, let's try that again. Our app refreshes and does not work for some reason. Let's go to our build. I'm just gonna hit enter and then save it again, and hopefully it'll. Okay, I guess I'll undo the name change. I don't see why that would matter. It probably doesn't matter. I'm just, yeah, something else. I probably just got to restart my compiler, and then hopefully it'll work. I can put a semicolon here, but that don't matter. All right, so it compiled successfully. Gonna refresh the page. And oh, it's complaining about the store file for some reason. That's weird. So let's go to the store file. I don't think I changed anything in there. In the root epic and in the auth epic. anything weird about this file. I don't see any errors being thrown. I mean, it just worked a second ago, with the exception of registering that one other epic. So let's try deregistering. Oh, I see what's wrong. I passed the function call instead of the function reference there. Okay. So now I try logging in, and it navigates us to the dashboard URL, but the wrong component is showing. So let's get that fixed by going to our index.js file, where we define our routes. And in our router, we're going to specify a different route with a path of /dashboard. And the component for that route is going to be dashboard. Yeah, I don't know why it's not auto importing. Whatever. And one thing that we need to do is we need to use the exact keyword, because the we want to use the exact keyword because in the React router it checks all of these routes for a path match, unlike in Angular, which in Angular it stops at the first one that does the exact path match. So yeah. Oh, I remember. It's a default export, I think. There we go. So now when we go to the dashboard route, it says hello from dashboard. So if we go back to our main page, click login, hello from dashboard, and if we check our ReduxDev Tools, login successful, get that stuff set. And actually, what's cool is part of the hassle in setting things up was, for the sake of this timeline bar thing, you can actually drag it along through the different actions that are happening. You can see the actions will be highlighted in white, as that's what has happened at a given time in the app, and it'll actually show you the UI at that given application state. So they call that time travel debugging. It's pretty cool. So yeah, yeah. I'm gonna do a little bit more. Just keep on reiterating on these concepts that I've been showing you. Gonna load some data into this dashboard, and then handle the logout function, and then that'll be the end of the application. So let's just plow on through. So let's go back to our code in our dashboard component. We're going to load some data in one of the event or the lifecycle hooks for the component. So in the component didMount function, we're going to call this .props .load dashboard data, which is the. So I paused the video and then I forgot about pausing it again. However, I'm pretty sure I remember this time where I had paused it. I had just been restarting my server because navigating to the dashboard wasn't working correctly. So it turns out I figured out where that was. The issue was when I was registering this login success epic, I had accidentally done a function call here instead of passing the reference to the function. I had this, for example, right here, and getting rid of that had solved the issue. So that's what I've been doing in the past 2 minutes, was fixing that issue. So if we start off at the login page, we click login, it takes us to the dashboard page. I also recently had gone to the index file and registered this dashboard route so that when we get to the dashboard path in the URL, we actually end up rendering the dashboard itself. I think I had recorded this in the video before, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's why I'm just kind of recapping the past couple minutes. So I'm also using the exact keyword because in React, it matches on all of the paths that meet the criteria. So unlike in Angular, which only matches on the first corresponding path. So yeah. So now that we have navigation to the dashboard working, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to load some data into the dashboard, and then I'm going to handle the logout function, and which will reset our application to the initial state, and that's going to be the scope of the rest of the video for those of you who are interested in staying with me. So to continue, we're going to go to the dashboard component, and we're going to load some data on the lifecycle hook called component.mount. So we're going to use the dashboard, or the dispatch handler, sorry, the action dispatcher that we defined right here when the component is, this is kind of like ng on init for those of you who are familiar with Angular lifecycle hooks. So we're going to use that, and we're going to dispatch this action, which will make its way into the reducers. And when we load the data, when we start to load the data, nothing fancy is going to happen to our data store, because nothing's that interesting about loading data until we actually load it. But in our actions file, or sorry, wrong file. In our epics file, we're going to create this epic for I think I had just started to type this out, so yeah, pretend I'm just typing this right now. I typed this out before I realized the video was paused. So we're going to create an epic which will listen for the dashboard load start action that's going to be dispatched. So let's do that. So we're first going to filter down to the dashboard load attempt ones, and we're going to make an API call to get some data. And after we get the data back, if the response is successful, we're going to return the JSON data into the main data flow. Otherwise, we're going to prevent this epic from going any further using that ignore elements operator so that we don't get stuck in an infinite loop. And after that, we're going to map the resulting data and pass it into the dashboard load success action dispatcher. So the data is going to come from this response.json, and it's going to get passed into this map operator, which is going to pass it into this dashboard load success function. And when that happens, it's going to go to the reducer, and it's going to get to this case, and it's going to take the data from that it's receiving and stick it into this dashboard data attribute, which is part of our state, or our dashboard state. And in our root reducer, I don't think we have registered the dashboard reducer yet. Okay, took care of that. And in our root epic, we need to register the dashboard load start epic. Yeah, that should be good. From is not defined in our epic. So let's make sure we import from RxJs. I don't know why it can't find it like automatically. Hopefully in the next version of WebStorm they'll fix that. From basically just converts promise into a observable. All right. Oh no, they do expect a default case in the reducer. So I thought I was going to be a rebel and exclude it. But if the compiler is throwing errors, I'm just going to return the spread out state. Okay, cool. So now that we have, well, first let's just make sure the data is getting saved into our data store successfully. Okay, it looks like it. Let me, okay, so yeah, we're getting some data back. So we're getting an array of objects with first and last names and IDs, and some avatars as well. So let's just do something with that data. It doesn't have to be that fancy. In the component, let's render it out somehow. So this is just going to help some of you Angular folks get used to some of the React React type stuff. So let's say let dashboard data divs equals this dot props dot dashboard dashboard data. And if that's defined, because if you take a look at our state structure for this in the reducer, well, in the root reducer we have the dashboard section, and then within the dashboard section we have the dashboard data. That's why I'm kind of going from the root level down. So in our root level we have our dashboard section, and then within there we have the dashboard data. So that's why I'm taking this approach. So anyways, so if that dashboard data is defined, it means that the data is loaded already. What's my keyboard doing? I did not type super. Okay. Hold on. I'm gonna do us both a favor. Comment this code out for a second. And just examine the component in the React-Dev Tools. Okay, so here's our component right here. So there we go. Okay, so I think I actually have to drill down into DashboardReducer, just because that's how I had labeled it in, where is it? In our root reducer. We could fix that by just calling this dashboard instead of dashboard reducer, and then rename this to say dashboard as well. There we go. So now in this code, the .dashboard data makes more sense, because before I would have had to write a dashboard reducer .dashboard data. Okay. Oops, wrong button. Wrong button again. There we go. Okay. All right, so we're gonna take this array of data that we're getting back from the server, and we're gonna take the first name and the last name out of it. And for each item in that array, we're gonna replace it with a div. And we're gonna need to specify a key attribute. That's like a React thing, as they need, whenever you're rendering like a list or an array of things, they need a unique key on each of them. Don't ask me why. It's a React thing. And then we're going to render out that data inside of the divs. just like that. And if the data has not loaded yet, then we're going to just render, oops, wrong button. Then we're just going to render out a single array with a div inside of it. And just give it a key of 1. And we're just going to say loading. And then in the render function, we're going to return we're going to start with a fragment. And inside that fragment, we're going to have a div that just says users, followed by that stuff we just defined right above, dashboard data divs. Does not need a this keyword. Oh, I accidentally put that outside of the render function. We can keep that inside of here. And then we're going to just have a button for logging out. And I'm going to use this notation so I don't have to create a constructor for the component for binding the this keyword. Okay. Compile successfully. So cool. My logout button is missing some text though. Okay, cool. So now let's start from the beginning. They started at this page, they log in, they load some data, and then they're going to click the logout button pretty soon. So yeah, pretty cool. All right, we're getting there. One more epic. We're gonna listen to the logout attempted action. Okay, so in our logout function, we need to dispatch it. So let's define that dispatcher. So logout, attempt logout, or something like that. We haven't defined that action yet. So we need to go to our auth actions, and we need to define such actions. Yeah, I'm just going to keep it real simple. Let's just do that one. All right, got that taken care of. I have a typo somewhere. ATTE is not defined in the dashboard component. Oh. Okay, got that registered. So now in our logout function, we can call that dispatcher. Cool. So now we're going to dispatch an action for logging out, and then in our actions file, or sorry, in our epic, we're going to want to listen for that attempt to log out. So this is kind of related to authentication. So even though we're calling it from within our dashboard, we're calling this action from within our dashboard component, we really want to be handling the asynchronous code for logging out from within our authentication epic, because it's really focused on authentication. So let's export a constant here. Call it logout attempt epic equals action $, state $, action.pipe, filter down to the correct type, and then we're going to map each of these to redirection using the router. So we're going to go back to the root route. Okay. And not only that, but what are we going to do to the data within our data store? We're going to look at in the reducer. We have an extra case here now. Log out attempted. And we're going to return that initial state. We're going to reset all our data to how it was at the very beginning. And now let's go and try our app one more time. So we go ahead and log in. Login successful. Dashboard load attempts. Dashboard load succeeds. Now we go to log out. Dashboard load attempts. Dashboard load successful, but we did not redirect for some reason. And that's because I forgot to register that epic that we just created for authentication. Logout attempt epic. So go to the root epic. Save the file. Let the program refresh. Let's go to the very beginning. Okay, so we start here. We log in. The data loads. Now we click log out. And it's trying to load the dashboard for some reason. Let's take one more look at our code. In the component, we call the logout function when we click on it, and that attempts to log out using this dispatcher. Oh, see, here, that's a typo. That should say attempt logout, or logout attempt, either way. Let's try that one more time. Start from the beginning. We log in, data loads, we log out, and we go back to the route, to the root route, and our application state gets cleared out. Oh, this is just related to the router. This isn't stuff that we did. But yeah, it's just saying that we went back to the root route. The key doesn't have anything meaningful for us. So yeah, that's all I wanted to demo today. This is React with React-Redux for state management and using Redux-Observable for handling the asynchronous stuff. So I have a similar video for Angular using the NGRX library. This is kind of my first big React video. I'm still kind of new to React. However, as you can see, I've been learning a lot, and a lot of the skills have kind of transferred over from what I know about Angular and Angular with Angular with Redux. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I have no idea how long this video is. It's probably pretty long. I know I had kind of accidentally paused the video from recording a couple times. However, I did my best to recap the past few minutes whenever that happened, and hopefully it was rather seamless. I reminded myself to keep checking whether the video was recording or not. So yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. Also, since I'm pretty new to React and React-Redux and such, if you have any suggestions or see any errors that I made, please let me know and let my viewers know about them so that we can improve. Or if you have any just any kind of commentary about things I could be doing better, or ways to improve the code style, structure, architecture, or error handling. Yeah, I didn't really do much error handling in this video. But yeah, other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video.